So throughout the first half, the pattern of play was that City would dominate possession, with United happy to sit off City a bit more passively than we are used to seeing them, but still using a very narrow defensive shape in a 4-2-3-1 with Bruno Fernandes and Rashford playing from the flanks, but retaining high and narrow positions alongside Anthony Martial, as Ten Hag instructed his side to man-to-man press City in the centre of the pitch, with Eriksen on Rodri in that deep single pivot position, and Casemiro and Fred behind him man-to-man pressing De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva. And it's no surprise that Ten Hag did instruct this man-to-man press in the centre of the pitch, but what was a bit more interesting was that when Harland would drop deep to receive the ball to feet, one of the two centre-backs, Luke Shaw or Raphael Varane, would be pretty decisive and moving out to follow him. But before I go any further, let me tell you why you should consider downloading the OneFootball app, because it's become my all-in-one place for keeping up to date with the latest football news, whilst also being able to follow Manchester United specifically, giving me access to all the latest news, videos and articles. It's also the best place to keep up to date with any live football, as during the World Cup they had a live ticker for any updates on the match, confirmation for the lineups as well as a rating for each player, and also all the team stats you need as well to get a better in-depth view of how the game played out rather than just the goals scored. So if you want to support the channel and think you'd also be interested in looking at the OneFootball app, I'll leave it linked in the description and comments below. We also saw Ten Hag prioritising pressure in the centre of the pitch on players like Rodri, De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva, by having both Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes hold narrow positions and look to instigate pressure on central players. And whilst this did make the central areas more congested and harder for City's central midfield three to get time and space on the ball, it did mean that there was a lot more space on the flanks for the two fullbacks, Walker and Cancelo. And so if City could pop the ball into one of the central players, enticing Fernandes or Rashford into the press, and then were able to bounce the ball out quickly to one of the fullbacks, this would allow Cancelo or Walker to drive forward into space, carrying the ball into United's half. However, this was something that Ten Hag was prepared to allow, as having Walker or Cancelo carry the ball forward down the flank is a lot less dangerous than giving Rodri, Bernardo Silva or Kevin De Bruyne time on the ball in central positions. And so what we saw in the first half was that City's main way of progressing the ball forward came from Walker and Cancelo driving the ball forward down the flanks. But the reason they weren't able to progress the ball through the centre of the pitch was that any time De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Rodri, Harland or Mahrez dropped into central positions looking to pick up space, they were immediately followed by a Manchester United player. And so because Manchester United's man-to-man press in the middle third was so well coordinated, the passing lanes from City's deeper players in possession into players sitting between the lines rarely ever opened up. Now what City were trying to do is have Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne play in those hide and wide positions, sitting in the half space alongside Casemiro and Fred, and use a positional pin-in of Harland and either Foden on the left and Mahrez on the right, to drag the Manchester United fullbacks and centre-backs apart, creating a space for then Bernardo Silva or Kevin De Bruyne to make a run off Fred or Casemiro into that space. And whilst this did look like City's best avenue to getting into the United box, and De Bruyne I think it was did get into a pretty good crossing position from one of these situations, most of the time Fred and Casemiro did an excellent job of tracking De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva and stopping this pattern of play from happening. The other problem I thought from City's perspective was Erling Harland. With Bernardo Silva, Rodri and De Bruyne being man-to-man pressed, Harland could drop into the centre of the pitch and basically become a free man. And even though Luke Shaw and Varane were willing to follow Harland when he moved out of that forward line, there were a few occasions when Harland dropped incredibly deep, almost alongside Rodri, and Varane and Luke Shaw didn't follow him, and so this gave one of the City centre-backs the opportunity to move the ball into Harland, and because Varane hasn't followed Harland all the way in this situation, he does have the opportunity to turn and drive forward with the ball, which would have allowed City to progress the ball past United's front four. However, because dropping deep and receiving the ball to feet and then turning isn't really part of Harland's game, we often saw that when he would receive the ball in these positions, rather than turning and driving forward, he would immediately look to play a short pass to move the ball on. But this would often be a pass backwards or sideways and really didn't help City with any sort of ball progression, taking them back to the point of play that they were just in. The reason City dominated play in the first half, having probably around 60% possession or even more, was firstly because when United did have possession, City were pressing them very aggressively. They would start in a 4-4-2 defensive shape, but Bernardo Silva would push up to Casemiro as Erling Harland and Kevin De Bruyne looked to press aggressively both centre-back. And so rather than playing out from the back as City would in this sort of situation, we saw United and in particular David De Gea prepared to go long once City had committed their front and midfield lines forward to the press. And in prior seasons, this would have resulted in United just handing the ball back to City, and City being able to regain possession quite easily. But in this game, we saw Anthony Martial being used as that direct focal point, and there were a number of times when he was able to control a direct pass and bring the midfielders behind him into play and moving the ball out to the flanks from where United could attack directly. However, United didn't always look to go long when they were under pressure. We saw them play out of City's press extremely well multiple times via a series of short passes and movement. Here we can see that Malacia has the ball in a very deep position on the left flank, and City are really looking to box him in, and so have committed 6 players forward to this press. Malacia manages to get the pass into Fred, and if we actually look on Fred's inside, we can see the first important movement of this move, and it's Casemiro who sees the opportunity of getting in behind City's frontline press, and so begins that run in behind Rodri, knowing that later on in the move he could receive the ball. It's Bruno Fernandes' pass into Christian Eriksen which allows United to beat City's press, and now United have a massive amount of space in the centre of the pitch to exploit. We see Martial make his signature move, which is to drop off from the forward line and link the play with a one-touch pass, playing the ball back into Casemiro, who's now able to spread the ball out to Marcus Rashford on the right flank. And so within a 4 or 5 second period, United have gone from being boxed in their own corner in their defensive third, to now having the ball on the halfway line and having the space ahead to exploit. And I think this sort of move perfectly exemplifies why Ten Hag does want a side who can build out of pressure, as well as we did see in this game that going long from the build-up is needed in some cases. You are going to have a lot more space further up the pitch to exploit if you are able to play out of pressure, and this is why the possession-orientated system is the optimal style for the Cruyffian school of thought. Now, despite City dominating possession in the first half, it was actually United who had the better chances. And we can see this as going into half-time, United had recorded an XG of 0.86 to City's just 0.08. Showing not just how good Ten Hag's defensive system was, but also how good United were going forward, and most of this came from their quick transition in attack. There were quite a few examples. This example comes from United's press. Here we see Azake's move the ball into Bernardo Silva. He's being man-to-man pressed by Casemiro, which forces him into a loose first-time pass. Now, if Marcus Rashford on the left side had retained a wider and deeper position, which is what we see from a lot of sides, who would rather defend in a 4-4-1-1 shape rather than a 4-2-3-1, then Akanji is probably able to move forward and receive this ball. However, because Rashford is retaining a high and narrow position, he's able to make the interception, and now United have the ball in City's defensive third, but crucially also have a number of players in central advanced positions. And so Rashford, rather than having to drive forward with the ball if he had no options ahead of him, is able to play the pass into Christian Eriksen, who then able to move the ball onto Bruno Fernandes, who gets into a decent shooting position but ultimately drags his shot wide. Now, whilst I thought for the majority of the game Ten Hag did get his defensive system perfect, there is always a risk with allowing City to dominate possession that eventually throughout the 90 minutes, there is always a risk that as they get into your defensive third, one or more of your players either switch off, get their positioning wrong, or just make an individual mistake of some kind. And City have more than enough players who have the ability to take advantage of this. If we look earlier on in the second half before City opened the scoring, you can see here that as Akanji has the ball, Fred is right next to Kevin De Bruyne, and as the ball gets shifted out wide, De Bruyne instantly looks to make that forward run in between Shaw and Malacia, but Fred is disciplined and follows his run, cutting off that pass forward. However, if we now look at the build-up to City's goal, we can see here that Fred's been pulled almost into a left-back position following Walker. And so when the ball gets shifted out to Mahrez, Fred isn't next to De Bruyne to track his underlapping run. Really, one of Rashford or Casemiro has to take control of this situation. Either Rashford has to follow De Bruyne's run, or Casemiro has to see the danger and move over a lot quicker. However, both Rashford and Casemiro are slow to react, meaning that when Mahrez plays that pass into De Bruyne, despite Casemiro eventually moving over to close him down inside of the box, De Bruyne is able to get into a crossing position. And we can see here once again that as De Bruyne is about to put the ball into the box, there's some confusion amongst Wan-Bissaka, Varane and Shaw about who should pick up who. And in reality, I think Wan-Bissaka should probably focus on Grealish's run round the back, with Luke Shaw pushing out a bit to cut off the potential pass to Bernardo Silva. However, this doesn't happen, and so both Wan-Bissaka and Varane go with Harland, which leaves Grealish free at the back post to attack De Bruyne's perfect cross and heading the ball into the net, giving City the opener. Now, even after City's goal, despite United being a lot more forward in their pressing and looking to get more of a hold on possession, City's pressure remains so well coordinated that United struggle to push them back. Here we see that as David De Gea has the ball, Mahrez, like Bruno Fernandes for Manchester United, is retaining a very advanced and narrow position, but as De Gea moves the ball out to Malacia, which I think he did very well throughout this game, with his kicking and overall ball playing ability improving significantly since the start of Ten Hag's reign. But as the ball goes out to Malacia in the space that Mahrez has vacated, Bernardo Silva is quick to apply the pressure. And as you can see here, Fred is being tightly man-to-man pressed by De Bruyne, and Walker follows Alejandro Garnacho's movement deep, meaning that when Garnacho does eventually receive the ball, City have managed to box United in, leaving Malacia with the only option of going long, which only hands the ball back to Akanji. However, we saw United able to take advantage of City's aggressive pressing later on. The ball gets moved to Varane from David De Gea, and you can see Grealish instigating that press that we saw Mahrez do on the other side earlier on. And as the ball goes into Casemiro, he plays it back out to Wan-Bissaka, and even in this position, City's press is still looking very good. Now, if I had showed you this situation earlier on in the season, you'd definitely be concerned if you were a Manchester United supporter. Wan-Bissaka receiving possession with the City players about to swarm around him. However, as he did multiple times throughout this game, Wan-Bissaka remains composed, and is able to use his ball control and awareness to shift the ball around Bernardo Silva. And then we can see that, like the example I gave from the first half, Casemiro, rather than holding his position behind the ball, makes a movement forward, offers that passing option to Wan-Bissaka, who finds him. And now United have beaten City's frontline press, and they can exploit City's high line. Casemiro waits a through ball into Rashford perfectly, and Rashford is of course well offside, but according to the officials he doesn't intervene with play, and City just get outnumbered at the back, with Bruno Fernandes running off Rodri and making that darting run through the centre of the City defence. And his decisiveness to take the chance off of Marcus Rashford and calm finish beyond Ederson is exactly what Bruno Fernandes can offer when he makes those runs from deep into goal scoring positions. And the second United goal to ultimately win the game once again comes from their ability to exploit the space in behind City's aggressive press. We see here that Fred's able to pick up a second ball after Akanji beats Rashford in the header. And from here, Fred does exactly what he should. He moves the ball on quickly, no nonsense, even though it is a simple pass, he plays it at the exact right time. And during this, you can see that Garnacho sees a space ahead of him in behind Akanji and makes a darting run down the left flank, meaning that when Fernandes is able to race past Rodri, he as well gets the timing of his pass absolutely perfectly, recognising where the space is and plays the ball out to Garnacho. And from here, despite putting in a relatively poor first cross, it actually works out as the ball comes back to Garnacho, and because Rashford had made that early run, he already has a head start on Akanji, who has zero awareness in this position, doesn't really even look round to see where Rashford is, and Garnacho does exceptionally well to recalibrate himself, move the ball onto his left foot and drive a low cross across the box, and Rashford has just moved away from Akanji, slots the ball under Ederson to give United the victory. So overall, I thought this was an extremely tight tactical battle, and in reality the game could have gone either way. I thought both sides played well at times, but Ten Hag got his defensive tactics spot on, with it being arguably Fred and Casemiro who played the key roles in this United victory, as we know that City's strongest points are Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne, especially when they make those underlapping runs into crossing positions as De Bruyne did for Grealish's goal. But for the majority of the game, the reason City weren't really able to open up United and ended the game with an XG of just 0.74 to United's 1.98 was because Fred and Casemiro did an excellent job of tracking Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne's runs forward. But ultimately, I think the victory came down to Ten Hag working out a system that nullified City's strengths, but also recognised their weaknesses in possession, forcing them down the flanks, where they are significantly less dangerous than when they are attacking through the centre of the pitch, and this was done with the use of that narrow pentagon in the midfield. But ultimately, it was United's quick transition in attack that once again won them a big game, as it did against Arsenal and Liverpool, with Casemiro and Fred's ability to break up the play and move the ball on quickly, and Bruno Fernandes' vision and weight of pass to thread those through balls at the exact right moment, and with the likes of Anthony Martial who can drop off and link play, Garnacho who can make those runs forward, and Marcus Rashford who at the moment looks like he can do everything, United may just be the best counter-attacking side in world football at the moment. Now, I did think players like Wan-Bissaka, Luke Shaw and Fred were all very good in this game, but I am looking to do individual analysis videos on those players, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when those videos come out. Give the video a like and check the description for more videos as well, and you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter for more content as well.